that we have three special invitees for our webinar, today's webinar. Professor Tobias Muller. Professor Tobias Muller, I read your 2007 article on defining legal risk 15 years ago, I suppose, yeah? And I kept it with me all the time. So I think that you are on the beginning of this compromise with these issues on my side. Tobias Muller is professor at the University of Oslo. And then we'll have a Portuguese superintendent of the Portuguese police force, Luís Elias. Is also a point of contact, person of contact at Europol in Netherlands. And then we'll have Orimas Kodokis. I don't know, I'm not sure if I pronounced correctly, but Orimas Kodokis, yeah? Kodokis.
Yep.
Okay.
And it's not the most difficult name in Lithuania.
Yeah. Is head of a resilience team on the second biggest energy company in Lithuania. So on operational issues, you have the expert here. Tobias Muller, let me introduce you better. He's deputy director of the Norwegian Research Center for Computers and Law, and acting deputy director of the Center of Experiential Legal Learning of the University of Oslo. Muller focuses his current research on regulating robotics and artificial intelligence and on risk-based approaches in law, including in the context of digital identity. Muller advised the EU Commission in its preparation for the Digital Services Act and participates in the development of standards for artificial intelligence. He has been guest researcher at Stanford Law School and the Max Planck Institute for Foreign and International Criminal Law in Freiburg, Germany. Tobias will address us on legal risk management. And please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Joao, and thank you for this kind invitation. It's my pleasure to speak to practitioners in this field, which I don't know that much about. So I hope to learn something during this webinar. So my topic is legal risk management, and I would essentially love to tell you the story about how legal risk management really works in practice, and being able to sell it to you as an approach that is always clearly useful. However, I think we might rather be at the beginning of a development rather than at the end. So I think we are still in the phase in which we see that risk management as a general approach is interesting and relevant, and it works in so many fields. But exactly how to make it work in the legal context is not an easy task to do. So I'll talk a little bit about these challenges. And so I'll give you the 15 minutes version of a 2-hour talk that I have on how to do legal risk management. But usually I focus on issues that are more relevant to business contexts rather than public sector contexts. So let me start off by asking a chatbot. Some of you may have tried that chatbot, ChatGPT, in the recent days. It's a new artificial intelligence. You can ask many questions, and I asked the question, how can legal risk management be used by public sector organizations trying to fight corruption? And then the answer was, I think, rather straightforward, that yes, it can be used to identify, assess, and manage potential legal risks. But I think the answer also, although it does provide some relevant pointers in terms of what can be done more concretely, it raises some questions about how can we actually identify legal risk? What is legal risk? How can we distinguish legal risk from other risk? And does it make sense to do so? I also asked about police using legal risk management in that context? And the answer from the chatbot was yes, legal risk management can also be used by police organizations to help prevent corruption within their ranks. And then they have the chatbot has some suggestions, which I think are useful in terms of regular audits and reviews and the like. So rather impressive from the chatbot's side. But still, we have this challenge in terms of what is it actually that legal risk management constitutes, and how can we actually do it? And to give you a little bit of an introduction to the risk assessment process, we start typically with a risk identification phase, but we have to focus on something. So for example, I could focus on the picture that you see here, and I could identify some risks. And it's very easy to see that there is one risk, that this guy is falling. And then probably in the risk assessment, in the risk analysis, we would say that, well, this looks like a very high likelihood and a high impact. So it's a red risk, it's a high risk. We could also say that there's a second risk in the picture. Perhaps he could get sunburned, not very likely, and the impact isn't so high. So that would be a green risk, not so important. And then the risk evaluation is rather simple because we can accept the sunburn, but we can't necessarily accept the risk that he will lose his life. But the problem is when we transfer this methodology into the legal context, it is not so easy because not so many things are happening in the real world. We don't have necessarily a person who is injured on the ground. We have much more ephemeral notions of integrity, compliance. The law comes in and regulates certain actions, which is not that easy to use the methodology on. But nevertheless, let me just give you one flow of the overall process, and this is based on ISO 31000, which is the general standard for risk management. And in effect, before we start the risk identification, we have to do something else. We have to look at the context. What is it we are trying to assess? And what are the criteria for saying, yes, this is a risk we can accept, and this is a risk we can't accept. And then at the end, there should be some kind of treatment and treatments. And here we can actually link it to the legal context. Treatments can be many different things. For example, you could say that you could build a fence on this picture, or you could introduce a new rule. It's not allowed to play a game where you're blindfolded in this location. So that would be the legal treatment to the risk. So in a sense, here we're getting some entrance to the legal perspective, but exactly how the broader legal context relates to this process is also dependent on these context and criteria. And so the context could be the legal context. What is the law in this field? And the criteria could also be what obligations do we have? What are the risks that we can accept, and what are the risks we can't accept? And also, this whole thing really focuses on what is it we want to protect in the legal context, or in the context of the risk assessment. So for example, here in this picture, we might be interested in protecting this person's life or health. Or if I do a risk assessment of my presentation here today, then I could say that, okay, I'm concerned about my reputation. So if I say something stupid, then maybe my reputation is damaged, so that I could carry out an analysis of my reputation. But more generally, I think it's not very risky, the situation I am in right now. But in comparison, if some of you work as police officers, then people talking to you will consider all kinds of other risks when they talk to you. They will not think of their reputation. And so I think this context and criteria, and what is it we are trying to protect, and how does corruption come in here, is an interesting starting point. And of course, in order to have a more complete process, we also have to have communication with different stakeholders. Typically, it's important to have many different stakeholders with different competencies. So if we're talking about legal risk, perhaps lawyers would be relevant, but also other stakeholders will be very important. And then monitoring, reviewing, and reporting is essential in order to have a process that can be documented and that we live over time. Okay, so this was very quickly the overall process. And but perhaps we need to start again with what is risk. And interestingly, the ISO vocabulary that was published in 2009 says that risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So if we start with these objectives, what is it we are trying to protect? Is it my reputation today? Is it the guy's life? Is it integrity of our economy? These objectives are important, and you have to have a clear grounding on these objectives in order to be able to say this is a risk for these objectives. And then there is uncertainty. Uncertainty can come in different flavors. We can be uncertain about things that can happen, or we can be uncertain about the law. So we can have uncertainty about facts. For example, is corruption happening? Is someone actually corrupt? Or we can be uncertain about what are exactly the legal consequences of that corruption if it can be documented. And I've been working a lot with legal uncertainty because it really incorporates both the uncertainty about the facts and the law. And in many cases, we have laws which can be very simply summarized as if A happens, so certain facts happen, someone is corrupt, then B is the consequence, someone can be punished or something like that. But then the uncertainty comes at two levels where we have uncertainty perhaps about the facts. Is there corruption happening? What is happening on the ground? And then what might be the legal consequences? Now, I'm not sure that legal uncertainty is really the key focus of people who fight corruption as yourselves. So probably for you, the uncertainty about the facts is more important in terms of what is actually happening and where could we see corruption. Okay, another key question, and Joao has already introduced this, is what is actually legal risk? And I've been publishing a bit about this, and I still haven't completely made up my mind, to be really honest. But there is actually also an international standard, guidelines for the management of legal risk. And this standard defines legal risk as risk related to legal, regulatory, and contractual matters, and from non-contractual rights and obligations. So somehow we have a relationship between risk, which was defined on the previous slides, and the law in all its flavors in terms of legal obligations which are binding, perhaps also soft law coming in somewhere, non-contractual and contractual matters. This is very broad. The challenge, I think, that exists with this definition is that it is so broad that many risks in our world could somehow be related to the law. So because many things have certain legal consequences, many things that happen in a project. If you have a project risk, then typically there is a contract for that project. And if you say that the contractual rights and obligations are relevant, then anything happening in that project could be a legal risk. So distinguishing really between what is a legal risk and what is a financial risk, what is a reputational risk, and so on, becomes very challenging. And it's not so easy really to distinguish these things. And I think, again, if we look at the risk of corruption, we could ask, is this a legal risk or is it a more societal risk or something like that? An alternative definition of legal risk could focus more on where the risk originates, if it originates in the law. And we could discuss whether corruption is a legal risk. Certainly, corruption has legal consequences, and I think identifying where corruption can happen and making sure that these legal consequences attach is an important perspective. But I'm open to the question of discussing whether we should call corruption a legal risk. Perhaps if we say that what we are trying to protect is public integrity, and it's a risk to public integrity, and there is a legal framework dealing with corruption, then we could say it's a legal risk. But I think this is really essentially currently still an open question. Okay, so then just very briefly on how we could bring this all together. So in this standard, in these guidelines for managing legal risk, the approach is that the ISO 31000 standard, which I presented initially, can basically be linked to the law in many different contexts, including we can look at the legal context, we can identify legal risks, we can use the law to assess likelihood and consequences of risks. We can use the law as criterion for evaluating risk, and we can use the law in order to treat risk. So more broadly, I think, yes, legal risk can be managed in a systematic and structured process, but many of the underlying concepts are still a bit ephemeral, and perhaps the notion of compliance and making sure that one is clear about what is it we are trying to protect, what is it, what risk for whom, all these questions might be relevant for the context of corruption. So for example, in public organizations, compliance risk could be a relevant entry point. And as I also emphasized, I think it is important to have interdisciplinary capacities present in legal risk management. You can't just leave legal risk management to the lawyers, and I think you can't leave it only to the non-lawyers. Somehow we have to talk together and find out, okay, what is it that is a risk here, and how can we deal with it in terms of a more complex process. And I think, to be honest, the standard which I presented, the ISO standard, the guidelines for managing legal risk, is very general. It just says that follow the ISO 31000 standard process, and you can relate it to the law in many different of the steps, but it doesn't really exactly specify how. So I think going forward, what would be really interesting would be to learn about more case studies in terms of how legal risk management has been applied in the public sector, and to see how those uses of legal risk management or risk management more broadly in the legal context have been evaluated, and what we can learn from this in order to improve the practice of legal risk management. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. I would put a question, a simple question at the moment. Did you say that the law creates risks itself? The law itself creates risks. Is the law a tool, a criterion, or a problem?
Well, I think it can be all of these. So for the perpetrator of corruption or crime, then the law certainly creates a risk because there can be a legal sanction. The law can also be seen as a tool for preventing or combating crime. And so I think the tricky thing is that the law actually can come in at all parts of the risk management process, and just bringing in the legal perspective and making sure that lawyers learn about risk management methodology, and that lawyers are involved in carrying out risk assessments will be a very good first step.
Well, thank you. We'll proceed now to Luís Elias. I'll take my notes now. Luís Elias is a superintendent of the Portuguese Public Security Police Force. He's a PhD and Master in Political Science, a degree in Police Sciences. Liaison Officer at Europol since November last year. And previously, Elias was the Director of Operations Department at the Police National Headquarters, Internal Security Advisor of the Prime Minister, the Portuguese Prime Minister, of course, Deputy Commander and the Chief of Operations of Lisbon Metropolitan Command of PSP, sorry, it's the acronym for the Portuguese police force. Is addressing the prevention of risks of corruption and intolerance in law enforcement. Luis, please.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you for the invitation. And just I'm going to speak about the prevention of risks of corruption and intolerance in law enforcement and in the public security police specifically. PSP, Public Security Police, was created in 1867, with the revolution in 1974. Portugal became a democratic regime and its police forces also changed. Nowadays, Public Security Police is a security force whose mission is to ensure democratic legality, internal security, and the rights of citizens in accordance with the Constitution and the law. The Public Security Police is commanded by a national director responsible to the Minister of Internal Affairs, and its total strength is around 20,000 police officers. PSP is responsible for the security of the main towns in Portugal and for the security of Madeira and Azores Islands. It has several competencies in several areas, from crime prevention to crime investigation, public order, close protection, private security, firearms and explosives licensing, airport security, etc. Nowadays, police challenges are huge, and organized crime, serious crime, terrorism, cybercrime, and financial crime affect modern societies and therefore law enforcement. Criminal organizations try more and more to infiltrate in its agents in the state institutions, whether by corrupting them, or tempting them into willful omissions or actions, or obtaining privileged information regarding the institution's structures and capacity for reaction, or even sponsoring the regular entry of their agents into the state forces, sponsorship of higher education courses for its agents, especially in law, or even payment of courses for entry into the police, public prosecutor, and judiciary. Police must invest in continuous training, in a constant balance between efficiency, effectiveness, and respect for human rights standards and ethics to prevent these threats and risks. The PSP is one of the most scrutinized institutions in Portuguese society. Just mentioning some of the institutions that guarantee the control of police action. First of all, the public prosecutor, judiciary, the government, the different ministries from Ministry of Home Affairs to Ministry of Finance, the General Inspectorate of Home Affairs, which is an external entity that inspects the activity of police forces in Portugal, the Ombudsman, the internal inspection bodies of the police, the hierarchical structure of the police, the media, and the citizens. Public security police have implemented several internal mechanisms to prevent a range of crimes that may affect police integrity. From corruption to denial of justice, abuse of power, concussion, falsehood, etc. At national direction of the Public Security Police, there is a national inspection which investigates the most serious disciplinary breaches at national level, and that liaises directly with the General Inspectorate of Home Affairs. At district level, all district police commands have deontology and discipline units responsible for the instruction of disciplinary processes and to propose the reporting to public prosecutor whenever there is a suspicion of corruption or of other serious offense. The Council of Ministers resolution from 2002 approved the Code of Ethics of the Police Service in 2002, like I mentioned, to promote the quality of police service and to ensure the full exercise of citizens' rights, freedoms, and guarantees. The consecration of ethical and professional standards of conduct common to all members of law enforcement agencies is an indispensable condition for a credible and efficient police service. Since 2018, the Public Security Police has a risk prevention plan for corruption and related offenses. In the report of 2022, Public Security Police presents a SWOT analysis of the internal and external environments that influence or affect the police organization and police missions. As strengths of the organization, I could mention the hierarchical structure, the respect to the law, existence of mechanisms for internal regulation, external instances of control, like the General Inspectorate of Internal Administration, specialization in different functions, ethics curricular units and modules, for instance, in the Police Academy and also in the Higher Institute of Police Sciences, as well as opportunities. We could mention the increased trust of the public in the police, and we can stress this because there was a large survey last year, in the beginning of this year, that mentioned this, that the majority of public in Portugal trust in their police forces. The reinforcement of transparency of and the commitment to the citizen, in-service training and specialization, involvement of police personnel in the institutional change, new technologies, interinstitutional cooperation. So these are, above all, the positive side of the story. But we have to be careful because there are also other problems. The difficulties of hiring staff at the moment. Police is not anymore an attractive work in Portugal. Small investment compared to police needs, lack of staff, budget constraints, erosion of values and responsibility, and also the tentacular corrosive nature of corruption and other related crimes. Police deals on a daily basis with organized crime, and there is the risk, and of course this already happened, that police officers are involved or are with organized crime and other criminal activities. Crime as a social problem, complexity of the investigation of corruption, which is financial crime and corruption are some of the most complex crimes to investigate, and the stagnation of social professional conditions. So in Portugal, the salaries of the police are relatively low compared to other sectors of the society, and this is also a threat for the police force. Giving a general overview of public security measures to prevent corruption and intolerance, I can mention that in 2019, it was appointed a human rights officer that surveys at national level the overall human rights police strategy, from training to victim support, to domestic violence prevention, to safety in schools, and also to corruption. Training and sensitization, so the curricula at the Higher Institute of Police Sciences and Internal Security and at the Practical Police School, the so-called Police Academy, include several topics such as code of conduct, human rights, the constitutional law, criminal law, police ethics. The close cooperation between the PSP and the General Inspectorate of Home Affairs. Of course, several entities that that somehow oversight the police activity, the chain of command action and the supervision at all levels, internal control mechanisms from audits to random actions, to procedures controls, etc. Police procedures manual, so there are a lot of areas of police activity that obey to a manual that was developed through a deep investigation process that establishes the procedures according to the law and according to the police conduct. The improvement of social professional conditions is a must in our activity, and somehow one of the functions of the police hierarchy is to sensitize the politicians to improve the social professional conditions of the police forces, of the police officers, and increase access control to weapons and ammunition also inside the police is also a specific measure to somehow control the use of weapons and ammunition, and also the implementation of security of verification to security conditions in the storage of seized material and values. So nowadays, in our complex societies, corruption, organized crime, financial crime, and cybercrime can upend democratic societies, our freedom and our standards of living. Judicial system and police play a fundamental role in the prevention and fight against corruption, but these institutions must have a contingency plan to prevent corruption inside their organizations. A strategy against corruption should include the following dimensions: proactive transparency, training and supervision, accountability for corrupts and kleptocrats, and defending the defendants. Police must establish proactive transparency. Criminals and the corrupt should not be allowed to abuse corporate secrecy to mask their ownership of ill-gotten wealth. It's crucial to guarantee judicial, police, and even public access to critical data of big corporations, such as banks and other financial entities. It's also fundamental to create unified assets registries to record real owners of properties, luxury goods, and other high-value assets, and build the path towards a global asset register. Training of first responders is also fundamental, also for investigators, for crime investigators, and for police commanders and supervisors is of utmost importance to sensitize police officers about ethical principles and accountability, and as well to provide specialized training to investigate different forms of corruption, financial crime, and organized crime. On the other hand, supervision, accountability, and the establishment of police procedures is crucial. To effectively deter corrupts, whether from police or from anywhere else, governments need to deny safe haven to them and their money. To strengthen cooperation, information sharing between judiciary at all levels, between different countries. And I know what I'm speaking about because I'm now working at Europol, and it's fundamental, this international police cooperation and international judiciary cooperation to coordinate sanctions, implementation, confiscating frozen assets, and bringing kleptocrats to justice. Unscrupulous actors retaliate against those who have bravely exposed and confronted corruption. So governments, judicial authorities, and police should establish protection programs, witness protection programs, and defending the defenders systems to fight corruption and support individuals that stand against corruption. Partnerships between police, judicial authorities, academia, and civil society may be crucial to understand the role of law enforcement in the community, the do's and don'ts, and to find ways to work together to identify misbehavior and to denounce police conducts that violate professional ethics and deontology. Every year, the PSP, the Public Security Police, instructs dozens of disciplinary processes, which is in the most serious cases have led to the expulsion of some police officers for serious crimes, namely for corruption and for violence, in serious breaches of disciplinary code. However, the supervision, training, sensitization within the police force is preventing new cases, and it's consolidating accountability and the quality of police service. We don't live in a marvelous world, but we are establishing and all we can and the processes that we can to prevent corruption and intolerance within the police force. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elias. I would have a question, a brief question. If you find, taking in account your international experience, if you find a structural risk-based approach on operational decisions, police operational decisions across every country, you know? Is that a substance, a similar methodology of acting in police circumstances?
In my opinion, no. There are different approaches in different countries. First of all, because the question of justice in police and law enforcement is, let's say, a national competency. It was not transferred to the European Union. And so you can find different ways of dealing with the corruption. You can find also different regulation and laws, in spite of we have European standards and international accepted standards, but each country has its own laws and regulations and different approaches. Let's say the conditions in some countries are quite different from each other. For instance, the salaries of police officers are diverse from country to country. I'm not saying that this is the main condition to avoid or to prevent corruption, but it's also a factor that influences. So generally speaking, I can say that there are different approaches, and I would say that it's fundamental to fight corruption. Like I mentioned before, the international cooperation, the sharing of information, and also joint training between different stakeholders, such as police.
Thank you. Thank you. Aurimas. Aurimas is head of the resilience team at the second biggest energy company in Lithuania, as I told before. At the moment, is responsible for protection, security, compliance, anti-corruption, sustainability issues at the Vilnius heating company. Before joining the company, Kudakis spent 10 years at Special Investigation Service of the Republic of Lithuania. Please, Aurimas, take the floor.
Yeah, okay. Do you hear me? Hello.
Yes, perfect.
Do you see my screen as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I would like to thank you for organizing such an event. I'm a big fan of international events where you can share the expertise, knowledges, and your competence. So briefly about my organization, as already it has been mentioned, we are second biggest energy company. We are profitable company, but of course we heavily regulated. Most of our incomes we get from producing green electricity, hot water heating, and as well as we supervise and maintain the grid. So I briefly present how risk management and anti-corruption management is integrated in our daily activity, how it works together, and what challenges we have in practice to implement such a risk management teams. But before going to the presentation, I would like to talk about pleasant things and to make some charming things. And I would like to talk about the football. Now is going the football. And football, why I would like to talk about football? Because football generally, for me, it's impersonalize the good and bad things actually in different companies. As you know, at FIFA organization is probably one of the biggest organizations in the world. It's probably even maybe bigger than the United Nations. It represents corruption and risk management. So when we see a football playing on the pitch, usually we have rules. We have the referee who actually manages and supervises the process, and everything looks very perfect because people used to say that football represents the best things because nothing below depends on your race, gender, and so on. But if you look behind that, from this beautiful picture, you see an organization that is actually involved in corruption issues. It doesn't have any risk management, and in my opinion, it had a very beautiful and very good head. It's a Blatter, and Blatter for me personally is personalize the managers. But I met in my career, I met many managers, and most of these managers will never deal with the corruption. We never wanted to install anything good, and the only thing these managers used to say and pursue you to not to do anything. And my next topic is to continue why we don't need corruption risk management. And when I mentoring the companies and consultants about these companies, I always say to people, why you don't need risk management? You don't need risk management in 3 cases. If you have a manager who always says there is no corruption in our organization. So basically, it means this organization is very corrupt, but we don't recognize that. Second thing, most of the managers who don't want to deal with the corruption and they don't want to implement risk management, we used to say, it's useless. I know anti-corruption measures, risk management is useless, and corruption, you cannot avoid corruption. Corruption, it's something like taxes and death. So why do you fight when corruption is everywhere? And the last thing for the managers who usually are against risk management and corruption risk management, they say it's not my responsibility. It's if you meet such a manager who says there is no corruption in my organization, the risk management is useless, and corruption is not my responsibility, I always say to people, don't go to such organization, because everything what you implement in such organization doesn't work. So going further, but happily, my organization is different. We have implemented those on the things. We have risk management system, we have anti-corruption system, we have a compliance system. And now I'll briefly present how we worked with that and what difficulties we had experienced before the system started work properly. So first of all, talking about the risk managers, risk management, I want to define how we look at the risk. In my opinion, in my practice, we risks defined by 3 features. One feature is, as already I think Tobias mentioned, but this situation in the future. And here I wanted to stress, because many people working with the risk management, we mixed and confused between problem and risk. In my experience, a lot of I gave a lot of consultations regarding risk management, and people used to start to talk to me in such a way like, we have a lot of problem, we need risk management. And usually I use reply, no, you have a problems, you need crisis management. When you manage the crisis, now you can install the risk management. So first of all, it's very important not to be confused between problem and the risk. Second important feature of a risk is it has to be very specific situation and conditions. And usually people and managers who work with the risk, they are confused between uncertainties and the risk. Risk is very specific, very concrete, very measurable. And on the other hand, an uncertainty is the thing which is hard to measure. And the final thing, what we have in our organization, all risks and damages has to be assessed and rated. If risk creates the damage, this damage can be assessed and rated, and it is better to do it, to rate it as in the form of money, how much you lose. So going further, so how does the risk system work in our company? And we do it we build our risk management system on the 4 pillars. So one pillar is integration. As what we did in our organization, we integrated all when we call compliance think under one roof. So we have the special unit, it's called like resilience unit, and we integrated in that unit compliance function, risk management function, anti-corruption function, data protection function. So basically all compliance and special risk management functions integrated in one unit. It's unification. We have unified the same model, the same processes, in order to make our system simple and convenient. And then finally, what is very important for our system, we everything evaluate based on the cost. So if there is a risk, we usually evaluate by the cost. If costs are too little, usually we accept such a risk and we don't deal with that. So going further, so it's just basically a little bit of theory. In theory, there is the risk called 3-line model, and we built our risk management system on the 3-line model. So first line of risk management is the risk owners. So in our case, it is a head of units, head of teams, actually who are responsible for the risk management, for the anti-corruption, for compliance, for cybersecurity. The second line is already my unit. We had a risk officer, we have anti-corruption officer, we have a compliance officer, and my unit is supervises, controls, implements, teaches, raises awareness. And the third line is already internal audit, who actually is auditing how does the system works in generally. And our unit as a second line, as unit who supervises and manages the whole system, reports to the general director and to the board. And now in our organization, usually we deal with two types of risks. We separate strategic risks, and strategic risks are more related to the strategy, to the long term, and process risks is usually it's about business continuity. So corruption, for example, is a strategical risk, because it can influence the strategy of our company, it can influence the image of our company, it can influence the internal culture of our company, and day-to-day operations risks. It's more related to the, for instance, the damaging of machineries which produce the gas, which produce the heating, and so on. So usually it's a day-to-day operations. So now, how does it look in the daily operations? We have in our company so-called register of risks, or risk register. We write down all the risks and do evaluation of every risk. So here I took an example how we deal with the corruption risks. So we calculated and we identified the risk. But if the nepotism level in our organization will increase by 30%, so we presume that 10% of critical technical people will quit the job, because it's very difficult to get technical people. You have to train them a lot, and they can easily get a job outside of a company. And if 10% of technical people would quit the job, so now in our company could rise the level of errors by 10%. And what do we do further? We do a qualitative risk evaluation. We evaluate what is the likelihood of such an event, what is likelihood of a situation when risk become a problem. And we have a special methodology how we evaluate the likelihood. And later on, we evaluate the impact, how much it will impact the strategy or daily life of our company. And the system does the calculation, and we have a rating 10, so it's a middle rate. Later on, we determine the risk owner, who is supervises and who is responsible for the risk, and we choose a strategy, because usually strategies can be a 5 or 6 type of strategies, starting from minimizing, accepting, beating, and delivering the risk. And we do the action plan for certain risks. And once we implement the action plan, we do the second evaluation, and we evaluate how the risk will change after implementation of the plan. So once we do a qualitative risk evaluation, later on we move to the quantitative risk analysis, and here we evaluate the damage, how much with such a risk will cost on our company. We presume that if we don't do anything, it will cost our company 100,000 euros. And if we implement the actions, we presume that in the case the risk will become a problem, that for our company will cost 30,000 euros. So 30,000 and 100 euros is a comparison. So usually managers will agree to give extra amount of money to implement such actions. So actions and save the money of the company. So when you have everything on your hands, just act now and implement the action plan. And we do it quarterly. Every quarter we evaluate all the risks. Usually we have about from 30 to 40 risks. And these risks are put in always beautiful matrix. And probably you have heard about such a matrix. It's a 3 types of colors. It's a low, medium, and high risks. And usually every quarter we bring such a matrix to our board, and we talk with the board what kind of further action can be taken and which risks can be closed and what new type of risks have arisen. And finally, what we do else to supervise such a risk management, corruption risk management system, we follow some KPIs in order to know the temperature of corruption situation in our company. So I recommend for the other companies also to follow the KPIs, to understand in what level of transparency we are. So first of all, usually I recommend people to follow the purchases contracts and to see what kind of prices we pay for the contracts. I mean, how much we get discount. If we pay more than in the market, it means something is wrong. So if we pay less, that's a good thing. That means we do a good negotiation job during the purchases. Second, very important KPIs is a percentage of awareness of a speak up line. So usually every company in Lithuania, especially in the public sector, has to have an internal channel for reporting some corruption cases. So it's very important to follow how many people in your company know about such a line. Furthermore, usually I recommend the companies to follow the number of consultations. So if you have anti-corruption officer, you have a risk officer, so how much consultations she or she does for the company. If you have more consultation, it means people are interested, the culture of anti-corruption is already developed in company. If you don't do any consultation, it means people don't care about your jobs. Actually, your work is useless. Furthermore, of course, also we follow, and I recommend for other companies to follow how many reports you get and how many internal investigations you have. Because usually if you wanted to deal with the corruption cases, with a fraud, usually you have to do internal investigations. And also it's very important to train your employees, to raise the awareness of your employees. And the rise of awareness usually is done by the training of employees. So usually we follow our KPIs, how many employees are trained. And finally, it's very important in following KPIs. It's at the beginning, it seems it's not really related to anti-corruption, but when you look deeper, it has direct ties with anti-corruption issues. It's the employee retention rate. And what our experience shows that usually people from an organization which is not very transparent, people used to move from that organization. So if you have the market retention rate is about 10% and your rate is much higher, so sometimes the corruption is a problem where people don't stay in your company, why we move away from your company. And finally, another suggestion from my experience, what I see in other companies, in my company, if you want to really implement corruption risk management, so first of all, what you have to do, your company has to be very mature. The managers, especially, the managers really has to be very, very keen on doing that, because without the top management and board approval, the system will not work. Second thing is the transparency and risk management culture. And what I mean by transparency and risk management culture, what all the people, including top management, middle management, and people, regular people, are really very keen on doing that. I mean, not only management and people, and they want to report. They want to learn about such things. And finally, if you want to install risk management system, so first of all, you have to do hygiene and to clean your house. So what I usually recommend, so first of all, you have to clean, so solve the problems. And when you just solve the problem, you can implement a risk management system. Because if you implement risk management system, but not without cleaning and dealing with a crisis inside, it doesn't work. So that's all from my side. So we care for the world. And
thank you very much. It was a very vivid presentation. Yeah. Now I understand better why you said that we do not need corruption risk management. And at first I was thinking that it was a typo, but no, now I understand better. We have still a few minutes, so I'll open a brief discussion. If anyone of the participants wants to put a question, please do it now. At this very moment, I would invite everyone, the participants, to open their videos, their cameras, because we're not machines, we're people. So at this point, maybe we could see each other a bit. So please turn your cameras on, and please make a question or two, because we still have the time.
I have a question for Tobias. When we did installation of risk management system from our consultant, I got such a suggestion that do not allow the lawyers or legal officers to do risk management, because if you allow to do the risk management for the lawyers, they put so many risks that sometimes it will look like that to close the company is the better choice. So how do you reply to that?
Yeah, I think that could be a risk. That's true. And I guess the response would be to teach lawyers to do risk management, because I think often lawyers have some kind of a risk management function in a company. So the chief legal officer might be looking at contracts, and he or she might look at compliance issues. And I think being able to contribute to this process of understanding what is it that is the effect of this risk, what is the likelihood of it happening, and being able to compare different risks also in order to prioritize, I think is useful for the lawyers to learn. But I think in the end, I would agree that if you put the lawyer in charge directly, you risk having a situation where the lawyer says, well, the law says X, and there is nothing in the law that really provides you an exception, and then you might not be able to do your business. But I think if the lawyer stays within this legal perspective alone, then that is what can happen. But if you have the lawyer contribute into the overall risk assessment, then I think things start happening. That's why I emphasize the importance of having many stakeholders present and active in the process. But Audimas, maybe I can also follow up with a question on my side. What do you do if corruption risks don't really affect the costs of your company? So what is it? How do you deal with it when if corruption happens? It won't really affect your company. It will affect society, perhaps, but that's not really on your balance sheet. So how do you deal with that challenge that for the company, corruption might not really be costly?
So usually in our company, we look from a perspective of our company. So in the case of our organization, we more look at the corruption inside our organization. I mean, if corruption has happened in my organization, so probably I will be fired, because my job is to do what corruption will not appear in my organization. So usually we don't look at the global pictures. Generally, we look on the perspective of our company. And sometimes it can be an issue when you have a case, maybe the risk, it is actually the likelihood is very low, but the impact is very high. But speaking in the case of money, in the case of cost, is very, very sensitive. You cannot define. But in that case, usually we'll still put that risk into our register and we still monitor. So for example, what we did in our organization, it was a big issue, for instance, with the gift policy, because some organizations, we decided to go to the zero gift policy. But when we did calculation in our organization, we decided not to go to the zero gift policy because it's too costly. It costs too much to supervise such a system. Because what I mean, it costs too much to supervise because we are a manufacturing company. In our organization, 1/3 of the people don't have a computer. We work, in the fields, we go with the pipes, and some companies in Lithuania who provides some instruments to work outside, they give to our employees the, it's how we call the big wallpapers with the moms and days, and sometimes with the naked girls. And actually, it's a gift already. And these workers used to put that all these big wallpapers on the wall in their rooms. So actually, if you go with the zero gift policy, you have to go to the garages and just throw this wallpapers down. You have to register all this pens and so on. So we decided that it's too much costly to do that. People will be very unhappy. But actually, if a simple worker gets the wallpaper from the company, which costs only €5, so it doesn't influence the transparency culture inside the company. So we decided not to, to go with a zero gift policy. So usually we do evaluation, how much it costs to supervise the system and how much it can be affect our daily life. So usually it's a balance of that. João, Luis, I think your microphone is...
Sorry. Yes, Eurico, you have a question.
Yes, my question goes to Professor Tobias. In your last slide, you referred to a particular point that I would like to hear you more about that. And it's related with the standards for legal risk management. In that particular slide, you refer that there is limited focus on public organizations when it comes to standards for legal risk management. Could you please elaborate a little bit more on that? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So yes, my impression, I had a look at the standard again yesterday in preparation for this talk, and so I think that basically what I can say is that first of all, the standard costs money to buy. You can't just get it for free. And the question for you is whether you should spend that money. And I'm not so sure it's really that useful because it consists of two parts. One is the general process, which I went through, and it tries to more generally articulate how it relates to the laws. So what can be the legal context, what can be legal risks, but this is done in a very generic way. And then there are some annexes with specific approaches for legal risk management, which are provided as examples. And one of them, for example, focuses on contracts. So to the degree a public organization is involved in contracting and wants to assess contract risks, then that might be a useful approach. But if your focus is more generally not on what kinds of contracts can we accept, but more generally, how can we prevent corruption risk, then I couldn't find anything specific in that standard which would be directly helpful for for this purpose. So perhaps in that sense, it is a bit less focused on public sector organizations, or maybe it's focused on also public sector organizations, but in a different context than anti-corruption work.
Okay, we still have a question from Daniel. Please, Daniel.
Yes, Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, not so good, but okay, proceed.
Yes. So thank you for the presentation. I have a question for Arimas. As a practitioner of risk management, suppose that you have the following situation: you have several risks identified, and the risk level for many of them is the same, maybe high, maybe not so high. How do you arbitrate between these risks? So you have limited resources, and you can pick maybe 10 risks, and you have 12 important risks. How do you do the arbitrate with this competing risk? From your perspective as a practitioner, how do you proceed?
So usually what I mentioned, usually every quarter, we analyze all the risks and they put in the risk register, and every risk has its own like a rating, and usually if the rating, usually we manage about like a 30 risks. So if risks which are lower, just below the 30 are not managed at all. We presume that we do a top 30 risks, and top 5 of the risks go to the board directly, and the rest of the risks are supervised by me or by team members. So usually you cannot manage all the risks. An organization has to decide how much can be managed. So in our organization is about 30 risks. So basically we do just in a simple way. There is from 1 to 29, that's all. It's a like gap, and other risks, they stay in the register, but we're not monitored, we're not usually managed. Because it's like if you have, usually they say that in our company is about 600 people. So for such an organization, maximum can be 40 risks. Otherwise, it's impossible to do that. So we just do very simple, do ratings, top 30 risks is going to be managed, and top 5 goes to the board usually every quarter.
So you mean that if you have competing risks from different departments, operational departments, do you have to choose if you have the same risk level and maybe some of the resources you don't have for both departments to treat those risks? Do you have these situations where different departments compete for resources to treat risks?
So you usually, if it's the same, usually the money wins. So the risk who is actually cost more, so we will win. Okay. But it's usually like that. Just imagine situation. Sometimes it can be the top level risk, but in the money perspective, it costs for the company, let's say 20,000 euros. But it can be risk in our project department when the risk, for instance, has the rating of 10. But the money can be at 300,000. So actually, if there is the same amount, this is the same rating, the money wins.
Okay. So you have a sort of double metric.
Yeah,
okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect. And time is running, and we'll try to stick to 1 hour of duration of these webinars. We still have a small question from Nadina at the chat. She's asking if at the building risk management system, yes or no, to ask for external help, or better do it with internal resources. Who wants to say a word on this? On building risk management systems?
Yes, we usually, it depends how many resources get. So in our case, for the building the system, we outsource it function. We do outsourcing. We don't do it by ourselves. We just bought the company who actually does the maturity evaluation. And based on the maturity evaluation, we suggest the type of risk management, which type we need to implement. And what we did, we didn't choose ISO. We did our risk management based on the RIMS methodology. And RIMS is more dedicated to the supervision of projects. So our like risk management more is like based on project supervision system. So I usually suggest for the building the system is to take the help from outside, but for the control to have their own people inside.
Yes.
Because usually what we experience now in the company, it doesn't work for the outsider. It becomes very costly. It's time consuming. It's much better to have a person inside to do that.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Okay, we are now ending our webinar. A note on Alan Uxtra question at the chat. Ben has already answered, but yes, I believe that every speaker may allow their presentations to the audience.
Yeah.
Anyway, you may follow us at the EPAC EACN YouTube channel, where those webinars will be stored and published. The two previous webinars are already at the site, at the channel, and this one will be in a few days, I believe. So please follow us and stay safe, and see you next month. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye. Merry Christmas. Merry upcoming.
Yeah, Merry
Christmas.
Christmas. Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.